You think skipping the Sabbath is just a small thing? Just another day you can rearrange? Let me tell you something. It's bigger than you realize. It's deeper than your schedule. It's more powerful than your convenience. When you push the Sabbath to the side, you're not just rearranging your calendar. You're rearranging your covenant. The first mistake you're making is you're robbing yourself of divine rest. God didn't just suggest the Sabbath. He blessed it. He sanctified it. He carved out a sacred space and time just for you. You're out here grinding, chasing, stressing, but the rest you're searching for was already assigned to you. The Sabbath is not optional. It's the prescription for your soul. It's the rest you don't even know you need until you taste it. And when you don't prioritize it, you're not just tired, you're spiritually depleted. The second mistake is you're damaging your relationship with God. You see, the Sabbath is a divine appointment. It's not just your day off. It's God's invitation. When you miss that appointment, you're telling the creator of the universe that he can wait. You're saying, I'll get to you when I can. But God said, remember the Sabbath. He didn't say if you feel like it. He said, remember, because he knew you would forget. And when you do, you distance yourself from his presence. The third mistake is you're forfeiting your divine identity. The Sabbath is a sign, a covenant sign between you and your God. When you neglect it, you start blending into the world. You forget who you are. You start living like everybody else. You hustle like everybody else. You panic like everybody else. But the Sabbath sets you apart. The Sabbath says, I know who I am. I know who my Father is. I'm not ruled by this world system. I'm ruled by heaven's calendar. The fourth mistake is you're opening the door to the enemy's deception. The enemy wants you to believe that the Sabbath is a burden. He wants you to think you're missing out. But what you're really missing out on is protection. What you're really losing is clarity. The Sabbath shields you, it sharpens your spiritual vision. Without it, you walk straight into traps, into distractions, into burnout, thinking you're free, but you're actually enslaved. The deception is subtle, but the damage is real. Listen to me, you can't afford to keep making these mistakes. God didn't give you the Sabbath to control you. He gave you the Sabbath to free you. He gave you the Sabbath to bless you. He gave you the Sabbath to remind you that you don't have to carry everything. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to chase everything. When you prioritize the Sabbath, you step into alignment with your Creator. You reclaim your divine rhythm. You protect your mind. You guard your soul. You tell the enemy, you can touch a lot of things, but you can't touch this sacred time. Stop making these mistakes. Prioritize the Sabbath and watch how God realigns your life, restores your peace, and revives your purpose. The Sabbath is God's sacred gift of rest. Neglecting it leads to exhaustion, both physical and spiritual. The Sabbath is God's sacred gift of rest. It is not a man-made invention. It is not just a tradition. It is a divine appointment, a holy space in time that God himself set apart at creation. When God finished his work, he didn't just stop. He blessed the seventh day. He sanctified it, and he made it holy. The Sabbath is not about rules. It's about relationship. It's not about restrictions. It's about restoration. It is a gift, a sanctuary in time where the Creator invites his creation to pause, to breathe, and to remember who they are and who he is. When you neglect the Sabbath, you are not simply missing a church service or skipping a day off. You are stepping outside of the rhythm God created for your life. And when you step out of that rhythm, you start to break down. You may not feel it right away. You may not notice the cracks forming in your spirit, in your health, in your peace. But slowly, without the Sabbath, you wear yourself thin. You run on empty. You grind through life thinking you're being productive, but you're actually burning out your soul. There's a reason why people are exhausted. There's a reason why anxiety and depression are skyrocketing. There's a reason why hearts are heavy, marriages are struggling, and people feel disconnected from themselves. It's not always because they're doing too much. It's because they're not resting the way God commanded them to rest. You can take a vacation, you can take a nap, but without the Sabbath, you're still missing the divine rest your spirit desperately needs. The Sabbath is not just about stopping work. It's about stepping into the blessing that comes from obeying God's rhythm. When you neglect the Sabbath, you are robbing yourself of the recharge God designed specifically for you. Your body may keep moving, but your spirit is drained. Your mind may keep working, but your soul is starved. You start to live in survival mode, always reaching, always striving, always pushing, but never fully at peace. And the sad part is, many people think this is normal. They think this is life. But God says, I gave you a day. I carved out a time. I invited you to rest, to reconnect, to be refreshed in my presence. You see, the Sabbath is not about losing time. It's about gaining life. It's about stepping into divine alignment. It's about protecting yourself from the world's endless demands and the enemy's relentless attacks. When you honor the Sabbath, you're telling the world, I trust God more than I trust my own hustle. You're saying God is my provider, not my paycheck. God is my strength, not my schedule. God is my source, not my striving. The Sabbath is not just a commandment, it's a blessing. It's a shield. It's a reset. It's God's way of pulling you back to Him. Week after week saying, come and rest, come and remember, come and be restored. But when you neglect it, you're rejecting the very thing that could heal you. You're rejecting the rhythm that could sustain you. You're rejecting the invitation that could transform you. God knew we would try to carry too much. He knew we would try to run too fast. That's why He gifted us the Sabbath, not as a burden, but as a lifeline. And the truth is, you cannot fully step into the life God has for you while ignoring the rest He provided for you. You can keep running, but eventually you will collapse. You can keep working, but eventually you will break. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's God's sacred gift of rest, and when you choose to neglect it, you choose exhaustion, physically, mentally, and spiritually. But when you choose to honor it, you choose life. You choose peace. You choose the rhythm of heaven over the chaos of this world. Skipping the Sabbath damages your relationship with God by ignoring His divine appointment. Skipping the Sabbath damages your relationship with God in ways you may not immediately see, but the impact is undeniable. The Sabbath is not just another day, it's a divine appointment set by the Creator Himself. When God established the Sabbath, He wasn't giving humanity an option to consider when convenient. He was inviting us into a weekly meeting with Him. It's a standing appointment on heaven's calendar, written not in ink, but in stone. It is sacred, holy, and intentional. And when we skip it, we are not just skipping a day, we are skipping time with God. We are ignoring His invitation. We are telling the King of the universe that we have more pressing matters than meeting with Him. Imagine having someone you love schedule regular time with you, waiting eagerly to connect, to pour into you, to bless you, and you continually don't show up. What would that do to your relationship? It wouldn't just create distance, it would build walls. It would send a message that other things matter more. And that's exactly what happens when we consistently neglect the Sabbath. We communicate to God, whether we realize it or not, that our work, our plans, our desires, and even our rest on our own terms are more important than His command and His presence. God didn't ask us to keep the Sabbath to control us. He called us to keep it because He longs to be close to us. The Sabbath is a sign, a covenant between God and His people, a visible declaration that we are His and He is ours. When we skip it, we step away from the very signal that marks us as His children. The Sabbath is not simply a religious activity. It is a relational appointment. It is where God pours into His people, where He reminds us of who He is and who we are. Without it, we drift. Without it, we start to rely on our own strength, on our own wisdom, on our own hustle. And slowly the closeness we once had with God begins to fade. The danger is that many people can be spiritually busy, but relationally distant. You can read the Bible, you can pray, you can serve in ministry. But if you continuously neglect the Sabbath, you are cutting out the very time God sanctified to draw near to you in a special way. The Sabbath is not about checking off religious boxes. It is about coming back to the heart of God. It is about pausing long enough to hear His voice clearly, to feel His peace deeply, to realign your life with His purpose. When we skip the Sabbath, we don't just miss out on physical rest, we miss out on the refreshment of His Spirit. We miss out on the joy of His presence. We miss out on the intimate moments where God wants to minister to us directly. It's in the stillness of the Sabbath that our hearts are softened, our eyes are opened, and our burdens are lifted. When you neglect that space, your relationship with God suffers because you're depriving it of the very fuel it needs to thrive. God is a God of order, of rhythm, of divine timing. He set the Sabbath to be a weekly reset, a holy pause where we step away from the chaos of life and step into the calm of His presence. If you repeatedly skip that moment, you will find yourself feeling distant from God, confused about your purpose, and overwhelmed by life. Not because God moved, but because you walked away from the time He set aside for you. The Sabbath is His love letter to us in time. It's His weekly reminder, I am here, I am your God, I delight in you. When you honor that appointment, your relationship with Him flourishes. But when you ignore it, you're slowly building a life that forgets Him. Skipping the Sabbath doesn't just cost you a day, it costs you closeness with God. When you don't prioritize the Sabbath, you slowly lose sight of your divine identity and start conforming to the world. When you don't prioritize the Sabbath, something dangerous begins to happen to your heart. You slowly lose sight of your divine identity. The Sabbath is not just about resting from work. It is a sign, a sacred marker that you belong to God. It's a weekly reminder that you were created in His image, that you are set apart, that you do not move to the rhythm of this world, but to the rhythm of heaven. But when you push the Sabbath aside, you start to drift. You don't even realize it at first. It happens quietly. Over time, you start to think like the world. You start to move like the world. You start to chase after what they chase, value what they value, and measure success the way they measure it. Slowly but surely, you begin to conform to the pattern of this world, instead of being transformed by the renewing of your mind. The Sabbath was never just about a day. It was always about identity. God told His people, this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. In other words, the Sabbath is a visible declaration that you are His. It's not just a day of rest. It's a day that testifies to your relationship with the Creator. When you stop prioritizing it, you begin to lose that visible connection. You begin to lose that anchor that keeps you rooted in who you really are. When the world is moving at full speed, chasing money, hustling for status, filling their schedules to prove their worth, the Sabbath stands in direct opposition to that system. The Sabbath says, I am not a slave to the grind. I am not a slave to the clock. I am not defined by how much I can produce. It reminds you that you are a child of God, not a cog in the machine. But when you abandon the Sabbath, you fall back into the trap. You start believing that your value is in your busyness. You start thinking that your identity comes from your performance. You start to measure yourself by what the world says is important. And before you know it, you're living for the applause of people instead of the approval of God. The Sabbath pulls you out of that system. It pulls you out of the race. It pulls you out of the pressure to keep proving yourself. It's not just rest. It's resistance. It's a bold statement that you belong to a kingdom that does not operate like this world. But when you stop making the Sabbath a priority, you lose that resistance. You start to get swept away by the current. You start blending in when you were created to stand out. When you don't honor the Sabbath, you become vulnerable to spiritual amnesia. You forget who you are. You forget who you serve. You forget what your life is really about. And when you forget your divine identity, you begin to settle for the counterfeit identities the world offers you. You begin to chase things that leave you empty. You begin to carry weights you were never meant to hold. But when you honor the Sabbath, you are recentered. You are reminded that your worth is not tied to your work. You are reminded that you are not defined by your productivity, your possessions, or your popularity. You are defined by the one who set you apart. The Sabbath is a weekly reset that anchors you to your true identity in Christ. It is a time where God speaks into your soul. You are mine. You are loved. You are chosen. When you let go of the Sabbath, you let go of that reminder. You drift. You conform. You forget. But when you prioritize it, you step into who you were always meant to be. You walk in alignment with your divine calling. You resist the pull of this world and embrace the rhythm of heaven. The Sabbath is where your true identity is reinforced. Without it, you will always be tempted to become someone you were never called to be. Ignoring the Sabbath opens your life to the enemy's deception, distractions, and burnout. Ignoring the Sabbath may seem like a harmless decision, but it quietly opens your life to the enemy's deception, distractions, and burnout. The Sabbath is not just about taking a break, it is a spiritual safeguard. It is a shield that God Himself designed to protect your mind, your body, and your soul. When you neglect it, you step outside of that divine protection, and the enemy sees an opportunity. He sees an opening to flood your life with distractions that pull you further away from God's presence and deeper into exhaustion. The enemy is not always going to show up as some obvious evil. Often he shows up as busyness. He shows up as endless to-do lists, as obligations that feel urgent but have no eternal value. He fills your schedule until you're convinced you have no time for the Sabbath, and you begin to believe the lie that skipping the Sabbath is no big deal, that you'll catch up with God later. But the truth is, every time you push the Sabbath aside, you are stepping right into the enemy's trap. You are accepting his deception that you can handle life on your own terms, that your schedule is more important than God's command, that your work cannot wait but God can. When you ignore the Sabbath, the enemy will keep you busy, but he will also keep you distracted. He will fill your life with noise, social media, endless entertainment, constant striving until you can no longer hear the still small voice of God. Without the Sabbath, you don't slow down long enough to discern what's real from what's fake. You don't pause to see that the very things you're chasing are pulling you away from your purpose. The enemy loves a distracted Christian because a distracted Christian is an ineffective Christian. And when you constantly choose activity over rest, you slowly lose spiritual clarity. You can't see the traps being set. You can't see the doors God is closing. You can't feel the nudges of the Holy Spirit because you're always on the move. But it doesn't stop at deception and distraction. Ignoring the Sabbath leads to burnout. You were not designed to run endlessly without stopping. God in His wisdom established a rhythm of work and rest, not just as a good idea but as a divine necessity. When you bypass that rhythm, you break down. Your body may keep moving, but your soul begins to collapse. You start to wear stress like armor. You start to carry burdens you were never built to carry. And you start to drift further from the peace God offers. Burnout is not just physical tiredness. It is spiritual depletion. It's the slow death of joy, of passion, of connection with God. What's dangerous is that you can be burned out and still functioning. You can still be working, still showing up, still doing things for God. But your heart is empty. Your spirit is dry and you are living on fumes. The Sabbath is the divine reset that refuels your spirit, that restores your joy, that reignites your purpose. Without it, you are left vulnerable, tired, and disconnected. The enemy knows if he can keep you away from the Sabbath, he can keep you out of alignment with God. He can flood your life with counterfeits. He can convince you that more work, more hustle, more activity is the key to success, when in reality, it's the key to your downfall. But when you prioritize the Sabbath, you slam the door on his deception. You reclaim your focus. You guard your heart. You break free from the cycle of burnout. The Sabbath is a divine weapon of protection. Ignoring it is not a small thing. It's stepping into the enemy's territory unguarded. But when you honor it, you stand firmly in God's rhythm, God's protection, and God's peace. The Sabbath is not about restriction. It's about realignment, protection, and supernatural blessing. The Sabbath is not about restriction. It was never about God trying to hold you back or weigh you down. It's about realignment, protection, and supernatural blessing. Too many people see the Sabbath as a burden, as something that limits their freedom, as a day filled with rules. But that's a lie the enemy has worked hard to spread. God didn't create the Sabbath to chain you. He created it to free you. The Sabbath is a divine appointment where God says, come away from the noise, step out of the pressure, realign your heart with mine. When you prioritize the Sabbath, you are not losing anything. You are gaining clarity. You are stepping back from the distractions of the world to remember what really matters. Life will pull you in 100 different directions. Work, responsibilities, ambitions, people's expectations. If you don't stop, you will forget who you are and whose you are. The Sabbath is a holy reset button. It brings you back into alignment with your Creator. It pulls you away from the speed of the world and slows you down to the pace of grace. You can spend so much time chasing goals that you drift out of God's timing, but the Sabbath realigns you. It repositions your heart. It reminds you that you were created to walk with God, not just work for survival. The Sabbath is also protection. It's a fence God built around you, not to trap you, but to guard. It is a boundary that shields your spirit, your mind, your body from being consumed by the world's relentless demands. The enemy would love for you to live life at a frantic pace. He would love for you to keep running until you collapse, to keep chasing until you burn out. When you ignore the Sabbath, you make yourself vulnerable to that cycle. But when you honor it, you step under God's covering. You step into a sacred space where the weight of the weak is lifted, where the attacks of the enemy cannot touch you in the same way. The Sabbath is a fortress of peace in the middle of life's chaos. God knows we need that protection. He knows we can't bear the load on our own. That's why He didn't just suggest the Sabbath. He commanded it, because He loves us enough to draw a line to say, this is your refuge. This is your time to come back to me. And the Sabbath is not just protection. It's supernatural blessing. There are blessings God has reserved for those who honor His day. The world works 7 days trying to get ahead, but God says, give me one and I will multiply the rest. It doesn't make sense to the world, but it's the power of obedience. God blesses what you surrender to Him. When you lay the Sabbath at His feet, He blesses your time, your energy, your family, your resources in ways you can't even calculate. He opens doors that no man can shut. He gives you favor that your hustle could never earn. There is a supernatural blessing that flows into your life when you keep the Sabbath, not as a ritual, but as a relationship. The Sabbath is a gift. It's not meant to be a box you check or a day you dread. It's meant to be the highlight of your week. The moment you come home to God, the moment you remember who you really are. It's where you stop striving, stop proving, stop racing, and simply rest in the presence of the one who holds it all together. When you see the Sabbath the way God intended, you won't see it as a restriction. You'll see it as the realignment your soul has been craving, the protection your life desperately needs, and the supernatural blessing your heart has been waiting for. The Sabbath is not a burden. It's a blessing you can't afford to miss. Prioritizing the Sabbath is an act of spiritual warfare that sets clear boundaries against the enemy's attacks. Prioritizing the Sabbath is more than just honoring a day. It is an act of spiritual warfare. It is a bold declaration that you will not bow to the pressures, the schedules, and the systems of this world. When you commit to keeping the Sabbath, you are drawing a clear line in the sand. You are telling the enemy, you can touch a lot of things, but you cannot touch this sacred time. The Sabbath becomes a fortress, a shield, a spiritual boundary that the enemy cannot easily cross. When you neglect it, your defenses are weakened. But when you prioritize it, you step into a divine stronghold. The enemy is strategic. He studies your patterns, your weaknesses, and your busyness. He knows that if he can keep you distracted, overworked, and disconnected, he can wear you down. The Sabbath disrupts that strategy. It forces you to step out of the enemy's system of constant grinding and step into God's rhythm of rest and restoration. The world tells you that success comes from non-stop hustle, from filling every minute, from pushing harder and faster. But the Sabbath pushes back against that lie. It tells the truth, that your provision comes from God, not your performance. That your worth comes from being His, not from being busy. When you keep the Sabbath, you are not just obeying a command, You are waging war against the spiritual forces that want to control your time, your mind, and your soul. The enemy wants you to be enslaved to your work. He wants you so entangled in the race for money, status, and success that you no longer have time to sit at the feet of Jesus. But the Sabbath breaks those chains. It declares, I am not a slave to this world's system. I belong to the King of Kings. My time is His. Prioritizing the Sabbath is how you take back territory in your life. It's how you reclaim your peace. It's how you resist the temptation to be consumed by the endless demands of life. The enemy cannot easily attack a person who is anchored in God's rhythm. The Sabbath protects your mind from the lies that tell you you're not doing enough. It protects your heart from the anxiety that comes from trying to control everything. It protects your spirit from the burnout that happens when you live outside of God's design. The Sabbath is a spiritual boundary that reminds the enemy and the world that you are set apart. It is your statement of loyalty to God. It says, I trust God enough to rest. I trust God enough to stop. I trust that what I lay down in obedience, God will bless beyond what I can imagine. That kind of trust frustrates the enemy. That kind of surrender shuts down his plans. When you skip the Sabbath, you open the door to unnecessary spiritual battles. You allow fatigue, confusion, and distraction to take over. But when you keep the Sabbath, you fortify your life. You build walls that guard your peace. You build rhythms that feed your spirit. You build a schedule that honors God and blocks the enemy's interference. Prioritizing the Sabbath is a weapon. It's not passive. It's not casual. It is a deliberate act of war against the culture that glorifies exhaustion and against the devil who wants to steal your rest, your focus, and your relationship with God. The Sabbath is not just a day. It's a declaration that your life is in God's hands, not the enemy. When you honor it, you fight from a place of victory. You step into the protection, the power, and the peace that God has prepared for those who walk in His way.